From religion to wrestling, gumbo to grits, politics to poetry, and all things Southern in between, this is Take on the South. Produced by the Institute for Southern Studies and hosted by the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of South Carolina, Take on the South examines the highs and lows of the American South, examines the truths and fictions of the country's most distinctive region, and picks the brains of some of its most accomplished students. To understand the South, you need to take it on, and that's what we'll be doing. Join us as we take on the South. Today we venture into the world of historical fiction with our guest, Katherine Scott Crawford, whose fascinating book, The Miniaturist's Assistant, will be published in May this year by Regal House Publishing. Katie is an 11th generation Southerner. She attended Clemson University for her undergraduate degree. Wonderful university. And as you'll hear, she is as good an historian as she is talented a writer. Her first novel, Kiowa Valley, was set in pre-revolutionary South Carolina. Her new one, without giving too much away, and the subject of today's conversation, is set in Charleston, South Carolina, in 2004 and 1804. The 2004 protagonist is an art conservator at a fictionalized version of the Gibbs Museum in Charleston, and her 1804 protagonist is a miniature portraitist based on Charles Frazier, one of the most prolific artists of the time who lived and worked in Charleston. Katie, welcome to Take on the South.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. This is a tricky interview because I want to talk about the book without giving too much away. So why don't we start with you? Tell us where you're from, tell us where you grew up, and give us a quick kind of trajectory of becoming a novelist.
Oh, okay. Well, I grew up in Greenville, South Carolina, in the upcountry, and am a proud product of the public school system of Greenville. And I was raised by parents who loved to read, especially my mom, and parents who loved the outdoors. Okay. So my childhood was full of books and full of outside. I went to Clemson University for undergrad.
We love Clemson, yeah.
Yes.
And we do.
Yeah, it's a good place.
It's a great school.
I was an English major there and a speech communications double major. And I started working at a camp in the North Carolina mountains in the summers and stayed there as long as I possibly could. And after undergrad, became a newspaper reporter for a short stint in Hendersonville, North Carolina. Then headed to Charleston for grad school and lived in Charleston for 2 years. And I was a backpacking guide somewhere in there too. But and I got my master's in English from a joint program between the College of Charleston and the Citadel.
Okay.
And then
you're very much a product of the upcountry, though. Is that right?
I am.
Your dad was mayor of.
My great grandfather was mayor of Clemson.
Okay.
So he was mayor of Clemson, and Leon Polk Crawford.
Okay.
And so I grew up around Clemson.
Okay.
Or going to Clemson. I grew up in Greenville, but in the upstate, Oconee County, my parents have a small lake place on a small lake that butts up to the Sumter National Forest.
Oh, gorgeous.
So that was just our playground, you know. But I have really strong ties to Charleston and the Low Country, and my family's been here forever, and still have family down there. And so I spent a lot of time down there growing up.
So you traversed upstate, Low Country. You are a genuine South Carolinian.
I think I am.
Yes, you are.
I like to think that.
Yes, you are. So you do some graduate work in the Low Country, right?
I did.
Okay. And this does matter for your book. Wouldn't say too much about that, but could you, just because it's such an interesting book, but I'm not going to lead you down the garden path here. Can you give us a summary that you're happy with rather than me saying, and what about that?
So the miniaturist assistant really is the story of Gamble Vance, who in 2004 is an art conservator for a fictional version of the Gibbs Museum. I call it the Galliard in my book. And She is recently divorced and has a black lab and lives in a kitchen house on Church Street in Charleston. And her whole focus is her career, and she becomes basically obsessed with the tiny miniature portraits that she is restoring in the Gibbs Museum. And without giving too much away, starts to see someone in a historic alley in Charleston on her way home. So it's really Gamble's story trying to figure out why she is obsessed with these particular portraits, and one in particular, why this person is talking to her. And she enlists help from her best friend, who is the director of a fictional version of the Avery Center.
Mm-hmm.
I may be getting... I keep getting my fictional versions and my real versions mixed up.
I was going to ask you about this, but go on.
So,
I love this bit.
So he's her best friend, and he's an African-American history scholar.
And that's Tolliver Jackson.
That's Tolliver Jackson.
Okay.
And they kind of go on this art scavenger hunt through Charleston and through the state, trying to figure out who is the author of these portraits. Why is she being talked to from this, what she thinks is a ghost? And then subsequently in the past, I have a fictional version of Charles Frazier, the famous South Carolina portraitist. And his name is Daniel Pettigrew. And he is contending with a changing post-revolutionary South Carolina. You know, when I'm telling people, I'm always like, this is like our Regency era without the regent.
Right,
you know?
that's fair.
So,
Yep.
And he's contending with his work, and he's got a much younger sister who he's bringing up because his parents are dead. And he has a free black family who has lived with him for as long as he can remember and is part of his family. And so Gamble arrives, and everything changes.
There you go. If that won't get you to read this book, nothing will. I like it. All right. So one of the reasons I'm really interested in your work is because you write historical fiction. I'm an historian. You are an historian and a writer. And I'm very curious about how you go about your research. So if I go to, my research is limited to what's in the archive, right? So I'm going to hit all sorts of blind spots, dead ends, where I can't find the evidence to make the case. But you have what is at once a luxury, but also a kind of daring that I don't have to indulge of. You're going to hit a blind spot, but then you can climb over the wall by a rope that you've made yourself. Is that a fair description?
It's a fair description.
Okay.
And the blind spots are treasure troves. Because as a fiction writer, you can really do just about whatever you want with it.
Right.
I mean, we all have our own personal parameters of how far we might go, and I definitely do. But what usually happens for me, and I'm curious as to how it works for you, but I will see a scene first in my head. And because I am such a history dork and have loved history my whole life, I usually have a bit of knowledge somewhere, you know, about what happened. And then when I start to research, it's just fodder for the fiction.
Okay.
So what I love about historical fiction is that I can set a timeline. History gives me the scaffolding almost, and which I need because I am a definite traditional artist personality. I am pinging everywhere all at once. So history gives me this wonderful timeline that I can work through, but then I can fill in the details where I want and fill in the story where I want.
Yeah, I get that. And I think, the scaffolding or kind of trellis gives you the structure. And then you have this imaginative capacity and willingness to say, hang on a minute, this blind spot is actually a good thing. For me, a blind spot is a pain in my neck because I'm bloody hell, I'm ending here. But for you, it is the point of entry that's beyond the historical scaffold, right?
Absolutely.
And you can do what you want with it. And that's a lovely thing. But it also takes a certain courage to do that, doesn't it?
It's a bit terrifying.
Yeah.
It can be a bit terrifying.
Yeah, unpack that a bit for me. The fear of it, or the vulnerability associated with it.
Right. So I think anytime you're delving into another point of view, you are, whether the person is imaginary or not, you are taking ownership of that point of view, which is it's an ethical thing.
It
There's
is.
there's
Yeah.
ethical questions to that, and I definitely make decisions about point of view. I made specific decisions in this book about which point of views I was going to be writing from. I decided that Gamble would be first person because that is how she appeared. She just started talking, and that's how it came. And then Daniel is this white man in 1804.
Hmm.
And so I thought, okay, he's perfect to have in a close third person, and let's see if I can do this, you
Hmm.
know?
Hmm.
Um, but it can be really scary to think, okay, I am having to use the capacity that I have to imagine what life was like for these people and how they walk through their world.
Right.
And that's when source work and research is just wonderful because, and I particularly love journals and diaries, and but there's just not a ton of those.
No,
So
that's right.
yeah,
That's right.
so I have to just and newspaper articles and things about the time, different events, and to try to piece together.
So,
You know.
when you do your research, I mean, are you at the South Carolina Historical Society? I mean, you're in the archive. I mean, you're digging deep,
Yeah.
and you're talking to people who know what they're talking about, right? So you went to the South Carolina Historical Society to read up on this stuff, or take us through your research process.
I did a lot of online research through Archives Online. I had the lived experience of having spent tons of time in Charleston,
Right.
and I lived in Charleston
Right.
when I was in graduate school. So all of the sensory experiences that Gamble has in the book of walking around, that's direct experience
Yep.
that I had.
Yep.
At least in the 2004
Right.
portions.
Right.
So I relied heavily on the Gibbs Museum.
Okay.
They have a treasure trove of articles, and I spent time in the Gibbs Museum. And actually, the reason that this book is centered around the idea of miniature portraits is because they have, I think they may have, if not the largest, one of the largest exhibits in the country of miniature portraiture. And I wandered in there one day on a trip to Charleston to do something, a trip not for writing,
Yeah.
and kind of stumbled out hours later, realizing that I had been hyper focused in this room alone.
Yeah.
Pulling the drawers out and looking at the faces and
Mm-hmm.
looking at Charles Fraser's accounts book where he listed everyone he painted. And so through the Gibbs, I got connected with Carol Aiken, who is the United States' foremost expert on miniature portraits.
Mm-hmm.
They call them portrait miniatures too, back and forth. But and she was wonderful. And so we corresponded, and I was able to interview her, and she was able to point me in the direction of a lot of scholarship on portrait miniature in that time period in Charleston.
Okay. So tell, for listeners that don't understand what a miniature, I mean, it's going to be small, we know that.
Yeah.
But is there a kind of history of miniatures? I mean,
Yeah.
why did they make them small, and how small did they get?
They got tiny. I mean, some could be as big as an inch.
Really?
Yes, tiny little ovals. So almost like cameos. Some
Yeah.
people might think
Sure.
of them as like cameos, but they're ancient. I mean, I think that scholars think that the first version of them were like Roman medallions, with the faces
Right.
on them. And then they got hugely popular during the reign of Elizabeth I.
Mm-hmm.
There was a famous, they called them limner portraitists, and he painted famous miniature portraits of different scientists and royals and scholars at the time. Shakespeare, I believe there's one of Shakespeare. But they were hugely popular during the 1700s and 1800s, especially the early to mid 1800s in the United States. And the first miniature portraitists in the United States lived and worked in Charleston and painted people in Charleston. So there are these tiny little, usually oval or round shaped. They're painted on ivory, watercolor on ivory. Back in Elizabeth, the first time, they would have been on vellum or some kind of a mixture of paper that they would have used. And the artist, you have to sand the ivory, you have to clean it from all its natural oils. And American artists really loved, and all artists loved, how the ivory gave the portraits a sort of luminescence for the people's faces.
Sure.
So I like to tell people that portraits were like our version, kind of like a selfie, or more close to like a school picture,
Yeah,
or, we take
yeah,
our school pictures, or
sure.
for our church directory,
Right,
or
right,
the snapshots we take in the booth with the string of,
right,
funny
right.
snapshots, the things we tuck in our wallets. So to
Yes,
these
yes.
people in the 18th and 19th centuries, they were tokens of affection and love, and people carried them around like we used to stick our kids' school pictures in our wallets.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the portability, I think, is the key.
Yeah.
And they're quite difficult to do, aren't they? I mean, it
Yes.
attracts some very gifted artists. Is that correct?
Very gifted artists. And I wish I could remember Mary something was the first female miniature portraitist. And
So when we first started talking about this, you said, well, Charles Fraser is going to be important to this. And I teach him in my course on the Old South, but not as a miniaturist. I knew he did that,
Mhm.
but he specialized, from my perspective, in kind of watercolor plantation scenes.
Mhm.
And one of the things I have students do is I show them 4 examples of Fraser's work, and they're gorgeous, right? They're plantation houses with fences, very pastoral. But the oddity, and I ask the students to say, what do these 4 things have in common? These 4 paintings, and they say, well, fences, yes, yes, and plantation house, yes, yes. But it's the absence of slaves. Like, there are no enslaved people in those portraits, and they're done from what 1801 to about 1805, 1806. And plainly, Fraser's a product of his time, right?
Right.
Because what's about to happen is that the slave trade is about to end, or at least the American participation in that slave trade.
Right.
And it's kind of cleaning up the image of slavery, right? And that's why there aren't any enslaved people in those pictures. And part of what you're doing, it seems to me, Katie, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you are also talking about the invisible bits that we don't customarily see when we think about Charleston, right? This is a kind of revisionist history at a certain level. Aren't you trying to peel back certain things to reveal some more of the gritty texture of the place?
Yeah, I'm trying.
Okay.
And I hope the book does that in some way. Um, I I see history in layers,
Mm-hmm.
and very liminal, porous layers, and that's what I always want my readers to see. And so the truth about 1804 Charleston and post-revolutionary Charleston
Mm-hmm.
is that it was this incredibly diverse place,
Yep.
and there were all different kinds of people, and that people lived together in ways that I personally believe that the history we learned, or at least I learned in the 80s and 90s in school, teaches us that there was quite a bit of separation. And while there was, and that's a whole entire conversation, um, all of these people shared the same stories and lived these lives together. And so I want somebody, when they walk into a garden in Charleston, which is what a lot of visitors will do, maybe
Mm-hmm.
they take a house tour, or maybe they walk along the Battery, or maybe they're down in the market. And what I want people to realize is that there are thousands of stories going on at the same time, and while we are looking at this incredibly beautiful manicured garden, the bricks we're trotting were literally trod not so long ago by people without freedom.
Yeah, so I think this is an invaluable part of what you're doing here, and I'm just going to quote from your novel. You say Charleston, South Carolina, is a town same as any other, no matter what they would have you believe. I mean, there has been a dedicated effort to kind of mystify Charleston, right? And what you're doing is recognizing how that happened, but also saying, hang on a minute. There's a real material culture here that isn't a product just of, you think, white South Carolinians.
Right. Yeah.
This is a shared and braided history, brutal oftentimes, but nonetheless something we need to recognize in order to come to terms with the creation of Charleston as an idea. But it doesn't really capture the reality, and that's where you step in. This is the reality of it, right?
Right.
That's how I look at this anyway.
Well, I appreciate it. And I think what I want visitors to Charleston to realize too, and people who maybe grew up there their whole lives, to
Mm-hmm.
realize it's their place too. It's their city. And I want there to be an openness to realizing that their story matters and that all these stories go on at the same time and one isn't any more prominent than others, no matter what we've been made
And I
to
think
believe.
that's the historian's fundamental charge here, and I think that you do a very nice job. Um, okay, I've got so many things to ask you, and I'm very interested in everything you're doing. I'm going to indulge my own interest for just a moment because I work on Southern history and the history of the senses. So I work on smell and touch and taste, as well as sight and sound. As I read your novel, it is full of sensory engagement, right? Is this something that was deliberate on your part or really a function of just how you write?
Probably both, but probably more a function of just how I write
Okay.
because it's a function of the person that I am. Um, for better or for worse, all my senses are going at full bore all the time.
Okay.
So years ago, I was trying to explain it to somebody, and I said, I really feel like I kind of walk around with my my epidermis turned inside out all
Okay.
the time,
All right.
which is a wonderful thing for a writer. Not so wonderful to try to just human in the world sometimes.
No, it isn't. Right.
But so I think that's just a natural product of I'm just always taking in everything, and I love place, and I have the Southerners, but I think humans natural obsession and affinity for place and what it does and means and feels like. And so maybe it's more important to say that as a reader, this is what I love to read. So I want to be transported, and I want a writer who will take me there where you have to call my name 3 times for me to realize you're talking to me. That's the kind of book and the kind of story I want to be enveloped in,
Right.
whether it's a TV show I'm watching, whether it's a history book I'm reading, an article. I want you to take me there. And so my favorite writers do that. And so I try to do that, I think.
So would you say, I mean, I'm putting you on the spot, but I'm just curious, which sense besides this vision appeals to you the most? I mean, I think I have an answer, but I'd love to know what you think. Which one pops out? Is it smell or is it touch or taste?
It's probably smell. Yeah, it probably is smell. With taste with touch being a close second.
Okay.
But
I would agree with that.
yeah.
Just as an objective observer, this is a very olfactory treatment of the past, and I think it works really well.
Thank you.
Because it does put you in place, right? I mean, it situates you. You're smelling Charleston.
Good.
Yeah,
and bad depending on what
and
you're smelling.
right. And who gets to define good
In
or
the
bad?
1804, especially.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I think this is the kind of thing that historians should be doing more of that they don't. But yeah, you help us get there, and that's the important thing. I do think that people are always really interested in how a novelist writes. Okay, so do you have a habit that, is it the kind of thing where you're there in the morning and you have your cup of tea and it's coming to me now, and I can only write between the hours of
Right.
10 and 3, and I must be looking at a tree when I do it. I mean,
Right.
but peel it back. What's the reality of that?
I wish I had that luxury, but
Okay.
I have children. And
Well, there you go.
Yeah, and so I will say that I was an adjunct college English instructor and did that for years, and I stepped back from that about 5-ish years ago, 7 probably now, to try to write full time. And before I did that, my schedule was scattered and all over the place. After I did that, what I try to do is I write when my kids are at school. So generally between the hours of 9 to 2, I try to concentrate on writing, and I try to close myself off from other things, which pretty much never happens, but I try. My routine is I have to get outside first. So I used to be a backpacking guide, and I've always had a lab. And my dog Merlin, who is a charcoal lab, we go on a hike almost every morning, Monday through Friday.
Okay.
I drop the kids at school. We go along the French Broad River, and I don't listen to anything on my phone. I don't do anything. We just go. And that I honestly think is the thing that opens me most up to being able to write. because it clears my head.
Mm-hmm.
And then I get home and I go upstairs to what I've started to call my boffice. It's a combination bedroom office, my husband
Right.
in our
Okay.
bedroom, and my desk in the corner.
Uh-huh.
And I sit down and I try to write or whatever. To me, writing is staring out the window. Writing is reading an article. Writing is reading. But I try to concentrate on that until I remember to eat lunch, which sometimes doesn't happen.
Okay.
And then I have to set alarms on my phone. But
Okay.
what really suits me most as a writer, though, especially working in like the long prose form, is to have chunks of time, to have hours of time.
Mm-hmm.
So if I can ever get away to a writing retreat, or if I can do something where I have a good 8-hour chunk, even
Right.
that helps me more, and that's just not possible.
Are you
Most of the
the
time.
type of writer that says I need to do 3 pages today?
No.
No.
Mm-mm.
Okay, so
No.
it's a bit. It could be 10. It could be 1.
It could
be nothing,
It
right?
could be a paragraph, and it could be 8 pages.
Yeah.
You know,
Gotcha.
it could be anything. And maybe if I had a set way of doing things, I
Mm-hmm.
would be more prolific at this point and more successful. But um, I like to. A friend calls it touching the story every day. I like to put eyes on the story every day
Okay.
in some way.
Mm-hmm. Do you write
Um,
longhand or do you compose on a
I write
computer?
on my laptop.
Do you really?
I take notes longhand.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I use legal pads, and my family was making fun of me because I asked for legal pads for Christmas this year. It's like, no, I want a stack, and so I take notes that way, or in any kind of size notebook on the backs of envelopes. Anything, I have to write it down physically.
Are you worried? I mean, I'm just curious as a writer about the impact of ChatGPT and
Yes.
AI. Have you seen it at
Yes.
work?
I have,
Okay.
and the creative writing it puts out
Yeah.
is abysmal. It's horrendous.
Tell me what's wrong with it. I'm curious. Because as an historian, I'll use it and I was like, oh, I know what's wrong with that. What's wrong with
Right.
it from your perspective?
Gosh, I don't know if I can really put into words what I think is wrong with it more than a feeling.
Uh-huh.
From the ethical standpoint, I mean, I'm one of those writers who I had works that were stolen from AI and from Meta.
Huh.
So my book is on the my
Uh-huh.
book, and some of my scholarly articles are on the list of what Meta used to train AI
Mm-hmm.
with no permissions, no
Mm-hmm.
nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And so on that side of it, you know, even though I can see where AI has its use and has its place, if someone says, "Hey, write me a poem about a daisy or the fall of Rome or whatever," it concerns me that ChatGPT searches all of these without permissions,
Mm-hmm.
all of these original works, and cobbles together something.
Yep.
And not only is it most of the time horrible, I mean, the poetry ChatGPT puts out is soulless and overbearing, and it just feels wrong.
It's thin usually, right?
It's
not
very
yeah.
thin, and there's usually not any kind of heart to it,
Right.
you know? And that's what readers respond to, whether they know to call it heart or not. It's the senses. It's the literal layering of the senses so that we feel something.
Yeah, so I'm a bit concerned about this stuff too, because I think the key to ChatGPT is going to be the quality of the question and instruction that you give it. ChatGPT is probably better than I realize. I think that our questions are not as good as they could be. But it's a big problem. Students using it for various things, and I'm just curious. Aren't people using it to write novels already?
I'm sure they are.
I mean, this is what
There's been huge issues in the publishing industry, in the fiction side of things, with novels being stolen, and then versions of novels being ChatGPT produced being sold on Amazon with different covers and slightly different titles. And
Oh dear.
yeah,
Oh dear. Well, hopefully that doesn't happen with your book.
I hope so too.
Me
And
too.
I really do feel like there are ways that it has its uses, and I appreciate that there are possibly uses for it that I haven't even thought of yet.
Yeah.
But when it comes to creative work, that I think, without trying to sound too clear than now, really needs to come from the human soul, whatever that is, I have large concerns about.
I gotcha, and I'm with you. Um, what when somebody's read your book, what's the big takeaway you want them to have? So, if you said, "I've got three things that I want people to take away from this," what's the big one? What's the thing that, and it doesn't have to be an obvious message,
Right.
but as an author, what is it that you want people to leave this novel with?
It's really two things.
Okay.
If I can have two
Oh,
things.
yes.
Okay.
I'll even give you three if
Oh,
you want.
awesome, great. I at the same time as I want them to have just a great time reading it. I
Okay.
want them to thoroughly enjoy it, whatever that means for them. For me, it means being transported and being taken somewhere completely different. So that's just as important to me, really, as I also want them to hopefully take away what I believe to be true, which is that history moves in layers, that time is porous,
Mm-hmm.
that we all share all of our stories, and that those stories matter, and the effects of our stories and the effects of our choices ripple out like when you toss a stone in a pond.
Yep.
So that's probably the top two.
All right.
Yeah.
What do you need your reader to bring to this novel?
Oh, that's a great question.
In light of what you want them to take
Mhm.
away, I suppose.
What I really think my reader, but any reader, needs first and foremost is a sense of curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And curiosity begets openness, or vice versa. So just being completely open to the adventure of what comes. And if a reader is open and curious
Mm-hmm.
about the things that are happening, because there are inevitably going to be things in the book and in the story that some people are going to raise an eyebrow at, that might rub them the wrong way, or who knows what. And what I'm hoping is that they are curious about that feeling instead of, nah, I don't want to listen to that. No.
Oh, I want to ask you an example of what they might go, oh no. But I'm not, can we do that without giving too much away?
Let me think. Let me think if I can think of one.
It's okay if you can't. I'm just.
I will say that Gamble, my main character, my heroine protagonist, she has a very distinct way of talking and of being, and she's very open, and a lot of times thinks and speaks very quickly without, and she might provide some commentary on Charleston and on the South that people might get a little worked up about a little bit.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
that is breadcrumbing right there if ever I saw it. What is next for Katherine Scott Crawford?
Oh, book tour for the miniaturist assistant.
Good.
So
When does it start?
May 13th is the novel comes out,
Yep.
and I'm having my launch party that night at a super fun, the Hub and Pisgah Tavern, which is, I live in Brevard, North Carolina.
Right.
And it's basically a bike hike shop at the entrance to the Pisgah National Forest. So that's just fun. And then I go on tour, and I'm going to have I'm most excited about the events that I'm doing with other authors. So I'm going to talk with other historical novelists like Joy Calloway and Megan Church and Kimberly Brock and Heather Bell Adams. And I'm really excited about an event that's going to take place at the Gibbs Museum in Charleston in June. And hopefully the advertising will be up for that soon. And I'm going to get to talk to one of the, I believe, associate curators there. And we're going to have a conversation. And I hope get to visit the miniaturist exhibit, the gallery, too. But I've got I'm going to get to speak with Laura Morelli, who's an incredible, most Italian, or she writes a lot about Italian Renaissance history and about World War II and art. She's an art historian.
Okay.
And Madeline Martin and Kaya Alderson. So I'm excited about all these things. It'll be peppered heavy through May and June, and then through the summer. I've got an event I'm really excited about in Asheville, North Carolina in July. The Great Smokies Writing Program at UNCA is starting this keynote author series, and the novelist Elizabeth Kostova and I are going to be on stage together there talking about, and I've loved her work forever. So
So if people want to be able to attend these things, what's the best place they can go?
The best place is to my website, which is www.catherinescottcrawford.com. And the events page lists everything. And most of these events are free and open to the public. There's just a few that are ticketed, and that information will be there.
Okay, good. It's Regal House Publishing.
Regal House Publishing is a small to mid-sized independent publisher in North Carolina. And they've been fabulous.
So it's out next month. Then the tour starts. And the royalty checks roll in. Yeah.
Boy, I hope so.
I hope so too. Katie, thank you so much for being on Take on the South. Congratulations on what's going to be a fabulous novel. I enjoyed it, and I'm sure our listeners will too.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to be here.
Our pleasure entirely. That was our Take on the South. Let us know yours. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at U of SC South. Take on the South is produced by Matt Simmons of the Institute for Southern Studies. Special thanks to Professor Dave Garner of the University of South Carolina School of Music for composing our music. Tune in next time for another Take on the South.